Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. Look forward to this conversation about North Carolina's historically Black colleges and universities. I appreciate everybody taking time to be with us this afternoon. I'm excited to bring you all a discussion about listening to the NC10, the 10 historically Black colleges and universities in North Carolina. I'm excited to kick off Black History Month with this conversation. Here at the Hunt Institute, Black History Month is an opportunity to understand Black histories by going beyond stories of racism and slavery to spotlight Black achievement. And this is exactly what we aim to do with this webinar here today. We do have a couple housekeeping remarks before we get started. First, we encourage you to follow along on our social media or tweet about today's webinar using the hashtag #PostPathways. Second, we will be live streaming this webinar on Facebook, and a recording will be available on our YouTube channel. Please note that closed captioning is available today by clicking the button below. As we dive into the NC10, I also wanted to share a number of resources with you, including EdNC's article and several reports related to the NC10 work. My colleagues will also drop these links in the chat for your reference. Finally, I know that many of you are joining me from HBCUs across the country, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge the string of bomb threats across our HBCUs and the stress and trauma this places on students, staff, and administrators alike. Today's conversations centers the important role of HBCUs across the state, and I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that this work is often done in the face of racism. We must continue to do better, and my thoughts are with those who are experiencing the stress and trauma firsthand. Thank you for those of you joining us, and welcome. I want to give you a bit of background on the NC10 initiative as we begin this conversation. The story of higher education in North Carolina cannot be told without including the 10 HBCUs. Even though there are only 10 among the 140 plus institutions of higher ed in North Carolina, HBCUs account for 45% of Black undergraduate degrees in the state. Yet these HBCUs receive a fraction of the attention, funding, and compared to their predominantly white peer institutions. So to bring awareness to this discrepancy, the Center for Racial Equity in Education, also known as CREED, our dear friend James, the great leadership he's provided in partnership with the Hunt Institute, myFutureNC, and our friends at EdNC, we developed the NC10 to engage the 10 HBCUs, both individually and collectively, to listen to them and to assess their challenges and opportunities for the future. These listening sessions resulted in a list of published recommendations on how the NC10 could work together to garner greater awareness and support. And to move this work forward, 2 convenings of the NC10 have been held to date with representation from all 10 HBCUs. The first meeting previewed the key findings from the listening tour, discussed HBCU roles in the state's 2030 attainment goal, and hosted a panel with Representative Alma Adams from the 12th District and Adam Harris, a staff writer from the Atlantic. The second meeting included philanthropists and policymakers to strategize and collaborate collectively to communicate academic, communal, social, and economic impact of public and private HBCUs. So this is just the beginning of much more work to come, but we are honored to engage with this NC10 and support this initiative. Today, I'm excited to have 3 excellent panelists who have been at the center of the work with NC10 and HBCU student success. So I'm going to ask a few opening questions of our panelists, and then we'll be looking to the chat for questions from our audience. Clarence Armbruster is the 14th president of Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte, North Carolina. President Armbruster began his tenure in January of 2018, where he brings a wealth of both educational and executive knowledge to the position. Mr. President, thank you for being with us today. Do you mind sharing a little bit about Johnson C. Smith University and what it means to be university president at one of North Carolina's 10 historically Black colleges and universities?
Sure, happy to do so. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much. A particular thank you to the Hunt Institute for having this forum, particularly in the beginning of Black History Month. Johnson C. Smith University was founded in 1867. It sits on the highest point in Charlotte, North Carolina. And if you can see the virtual back behind me, that is the building I sit in, historic Biddle Hall, that was completed in 1883. It was constructed in large part by many of the students who were recently freed men who had been enslaved. And it started out with an affiliation with the Presbyterian Church. So I'm proud to be a president, the 14th president of Johnson C. Smith University. That vantage point on the largest, highest point in Charlotte allows us to oversee what they call uptown here in Charlotte. They don't call it downtown, but uptown Charlotte. And it gives us a unique perspective on the connections that could be made between an institution like Johnson C. Smith University and the rest of the city here. Johnson C. Smith, we are a private premier liberal arts institution. We are, as I noted, in Charlotte, the nation's second largest financial center, only behind New York. And Charlotte is one of the country's most dynamic and fastest growing areas. And we believe here that as a city, it provides us a really, really unique asset upon which to build with our students. It provides incredible educational opportunities, as well as career and postgraduate opportunities, which we emphasize here at Johnson C. Smith. Johnson C. Smith currently has just under 1,200 students. We offer 22 undergraduate programs, 1 graduate program. And we've recently embarked upon a strategic plan entitled The Golden Blueprint, Golden. It's a little play on our colors, which are blue and gold, you may have noticed. But we think that that strategic plan is going to transform the university, and it will have a relentless focus on academic excellence and career and postgraduate readiness, which will fulfill what we refer to as the JCSU promise. And it's a promise we make to every student who comes to Johnson C. Smith, which is that we plan on graduating students who are going to be able to do 4 things. One is that they're going to be able to communicate effectively. They're going to be able to think critically. They're going to be able to work independently as well as collaboratively. But most importantly, they're going to be able to demonstrate not only competence, but excellence in their chosen field. But that's not a promise that just is limited to the student. It's also a promise we make to employers and to graduate schools to which our students will attend. So we're really, really proud of that. I think the second part of your question may have been, what does it mean to be a president here? As one of the 10 HBCUs in North Carolina, it quite frankly is a privilege. It really is a privilege to sit at what I consider to be the citadel of HBCUs here in North Carolina. I get to work with some of the giants in higher ed at the other institutions around North Carolina. And it provides an incredible amount of opportunities for all African-American students who come to North Carolina. And you noted some of those significant factors that we represent 45% of the graduates here in North Carolina. But we also have a significant economic input for the state, in which we provide about $2 billion worth of economic output for the state of North Carolina. So Johnson C. Smith is poised to work with its other 9 colleagues. We were proud to host the first convening here in Charlotte in August of 2021, and we really commend the work of the NC10, and thanks again to the Hunt Institute for having us here today.
Thanks, sir. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Angela Coleman, who's the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at North Carolina Central University, where she provides visionary and strategic direction to the Division of Student Affairs and oversees the various offices of student life. Dr. Coleman, thank you for being with us today. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about your role at NC Central and how student affairs offices are important to the culture of an HBCU like NCCU?
Well, thank you, Javi, for the question. And of course, thank you for the invitation today to speak. What can I say about my role? You know, I've had the pleasure of serving as the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs here at North Carolina Central, where since 2018, so almost 4 years now, and I have the opportunity to lead a diverse portfolio of about 17 departments in a division with, I would say, over 125 highly trained, competent, and confident student affairs professionals who are all dedicated to providing cutting edge student experience from the time that our students arrive on the sloping hills and the verdant green at Welcome Week through graduation. So while many touch points exist on our campus for students to get support, in my role as Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, I have a broad decision-making authority to bring innovative programs, services, and pull all those resources together to better serve the needs, and not just the needs, but the wants of our students. And we know that, they have a lot of wants. So I'm here to make those happen. North Carolina Central University is a historically Black master's comprehensive university. We serve over 7,900 students in Durham, North Carolina. So we are in the city of medicine. And 112 years ago, our institution was really founded at a time when Black Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina was at its peak. And the college opened its doors to educating Blacks in North Carolina. And a prosperous pharmacist at the time, Dr. James E. Shepard, he was also a religious educator. He had a vision and he acted on his dream. And Dr. Shepard was a successful businessman who who was thought to be at the time one of the wealthiest African Americans in the United States. And he opened the doors to the National Religious Training School in Chautauqua for the colored race on July 5th, 1910. So it was later on that the school changed the name to North Carolina Central College, or North Carolina College for Negroes. And then we became North Carolina Central University. So, our institution, again, we are one of the nation's first state-supported liberal arts institutions for Black students. Our university's motto, which I love, is truth and service. And that holds true for our students, for faculty, and of course, administrators such as myself. And when we talk about student affairs and the importance, right, of student affairs and the culture of an HBCU such as North Carolina Central University, well, first I have to say that I consider this opportunity to work at an HBCU as a privilege and a reward, because I have an opportunity to encourage success, among students. And what I tell my staff all the time, they hear me say this, when students make a decision to attend North Carolina Central, to attend an HBCU, they're making a very intentional choice. So our students have many options. They can attend any institution that they want to attend, but they are coming to an HBCU because of the experience that we offer. And I would say that student affairs is at the forefront of offering that experience. So while we already know and we understand that HBCUs are not a monolith and that they cannot be spoken of in uniformity, I do believe that we do share a common heritage that extends to the importance of student affairs at a HBCU. And so to brag on student affairs, my colleagues, I would say that student affairs on an HBCU campus, we're laying the groundwork for students to lead exceptional lives. Our campuses are a place where friendships are made, where passions and careers are born. Self-discovery often comes in the form of challenges and perseverance, and even where long-lasting marriages, have been made. I know on our campus, that has happened on many HBCU campuses. And like all universities, traditional academic programs alone just aren't enough, to support students' transition and their success. So this is where student affairs, where we really step up and where we come into play. And in particular, HBCU student affairs professionals, we're much more like parents or extended family members to our students. We often speak about ourselves as family members and guardians of our students. And I would say for myself, I have felt lately with everything that's been happening with the HBCU bomb threats, our students have been scared, parents concerned. I've definitely gone into mama bear mode, very fierce, protective mode with my students. So, we're not just administrators, we are looked at as the guardians of our students. And student affairs professionals at HBCUs, we really, it really means devotion, to our students. And we're very service oriented in how we serve our students. So, in addition to offering support services, we're addressing health and wellness needs, cultivating the family connection to the university and the local community. We serve also the unique and indispensable role as the gatekeepers for institutional history, culture, campus traditions and rituals that are associated with our respective HBCUs. So student affairs has a significant role in influencing who our students become, how they see themselves, how they develop, as well as how they develop that undying love, for our campuses as HBCUs. So, whether it's 1040 break that we have here at NCCU, Fried Chicken Wednesdays, FAMU Set Fridays, Morgan State, the Freshman Promethean Walk, the AUC Olive Branch, convocations, pinnings, and pageants, with week-long homecoming celebrations that feel more like family reunions, the crowning of campus queens and kings, and halftime shows that we all know rival the excitement of sometimes the actual game. Student affairs at HBCUs provide students with distinct traditions and experiences that help to foster a connection and belonging that lasts for generations. So we see that on our campuses with the legacy and the pride that is instilled on our campuses. So we're everything. Student affairs is everything to me at HBCU.
Indeed, you are. And thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. We're actually excited that your student body president, Derek Stanfield, is going to be joining us this semester as an intern with us on the students. It's coming, and everybody wants time with him on our team. So thanks for the great work you all are doing. Up next, we're going to get a chance to hear from our my dear friend, Mevin Rash, who is the CEO and editor-in-chief at EdNC, a news and information resource that works to expand educational opportunities for all students in North Carolina. Mevin, thanks for being with us. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about EdNC, generally the work you're doing here in North Carolina, and how EdNC is using its platform to uplift stories of our NC10?
Hey, y'all, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Javed, for including me and EdNC in the conversation. And so we tell stories. EdNC tells stories. We tell stories about our students and our state and our future. And we tell stories about the education continuum from pre-K to K-12 to post-secondary access, including all 58 community colleges. We haven't to date told the stories of UNC system institutions or North Carolina's independent colleges and universities. But I also want to shout out James Ford for calling the question for all of us to come and have a conversation with the NC10 and talk about what dedicated news coverage of our HBCUs would look like, and ask them, do you want dedicated news coverage? So I think that's the first question, right? And that's a shift in how we're doing things. News outlets haven't traditionally asked permission to then go in and cover stories. And so we want to start with that very intentional shift. Do our NC10 want dedicated news coverage? And then the second question would be, do you want EdNC to provide that coverage? Or is there a different outlet that you would like to be providing that coverage? Whether it's us or someone else, I think it's really important for that coverage to be Black-led, Black-edited, and Black-created. I also think we need to have a conversation about who's the audience. So for us at EdNC, most of our articles are reaching policymakers, they're reaching philanthropists, and they're reaching the public at large. But in the news media, we also talk about targeted content for targeted audiences. And in addition, the NC10 should be able to have a conversation about, do they want content created for students and parents and the alumni? And then the fifth question I would say we need to wrestle with is how to make these investments, if we're going to make these investments, in a way that builds a pipeline of Black journalists. Because that is when we get to systems change, and that is when it won't just be one outlet having dedicated coverage. It will be more and more and more outlets having dedicated coverage.
Thank you, Mevin. Appreciate those thoughts. So, Mr. President, I'm going to come back to you. We were actually on the phone, some of our team today, with some of our friends at Burroughs Welcome Fund, and Alfred Mays, who I'm not sure if you had the good fortune of meeting, but asked the question like, what's the come of this NC10, and how do we, the collective here that is supporting this NC10, and how does philanthropy help amplify and lift up to get the state to really do its fair share? Can you, thinking about the two convenings we've had of the 10 institutions, obviously, as you reminded us, you hosted the first on your campus. Can you tell us why collaboration across NC10 is so important, and what are some of the key takeaways? What were some of the key takeaways from your perspective from these two convenings?
Thanks again for the question. One of the things that we've learned, particularly coming, and we're not actually out of it, but in the midst of this crazy pandemic, which really spawned what I call the kind of tri-calamities, if you will. We had the pandemic, we had the resulting economic results from the pandemic, the poor economic results that affected particularly many of our families more so than any others. And then on top of that, we had the kind of reawakening of America to its challenges in terms of racial inequality with the unfortunate death of George Floyd and others that happened in that crazy year of 2020. And one of the things that it spawned was necessarily us coming together, HBCUs as a whole. And what we found is that we're much stronger together than we are apart. And that was nowhere more evident than in the incredible efforts that were launched on HBCU's behalves with respect to the federal government in terms of relief that we all so desperately needed in the wake of the pandemic and those tri-calamities. We had, as our leader, you mentioned her earlier, who was on the panel when they came here to Johnson C. Smith, Alma Adams, who leads the bicameral, bipartisan HBCU caucus, who was so effective along working with the UNCF, of which we're a member, and the Thurgood Marshall Foundation and other entities who collaboratively went in and made the case to Congress, which resulted in the Futures Act that Alma Adams sponsored being passed. The HERF bill that supported so many of us through the very, very deep wells of the economic adverse effects. The American Rescue Plan, which was added. So all of those things couldn't have come together unless there was collaboration. I think what the NC10 can take from that is the fact that as a significant force, and I mentioned earlier the economic impact it has on the state. You mentioned the number of graduates, 45% of all African-American graduates come from the NC10 and $2 billion worth of economic development. There are a number of things that can happen here. And one of the things that I got out of the convenings is some of the recommendations that were made in Mr. Ford's work. And if I may, I just wanted to share a couple of them. One is that we need to really, really think about a shared agenda based on commonly held strengths. I think, as Dr. Coleman mentioned, we're not a monolith, but there are themes that run across many of our institutions, and particularly for students of color. So having a common agenda that reflects our strengths. To really formalize this network, we've now had 2 convenings, and I know we're all very hopeful that this will become institutionalized so that we have these opportunities to talk among ourselves and to develop strategies and agendas that can benefit all 10 of the institutions. I'm sure the public knows, but of the 10 institutions, 5 are public and 5 are private. And those public institutions often have an opportunity to meet one another through their system work on behalf of what's going on in North Carolina. And many of our private institutions are members of the UNCF, for example. I know many of my colleagues who I get to meet in that vein as well. But we don't have a common North Carolina agenda, which is something that we need to do to make sure that those resources and opportunities that flow through the state can be made beneficial to us. So as it relates to our policymakers, again, referring to the report, we do need to look at those federal efforts. I think at our last convening, which was held on the great campus of North Carolina Central. My son graduated from that fine institution, Dr. Coleman, Eagle Pride, right? We talked about the need to create maybe something comparable to what occurs at the federal level, which is a North Carolina HBCU caucus, similar to what happens at the federal level, and something that Alma Adams had helped create. So there are many things that we can do, and I think the convenings were wonderful in that it gave us an opportunity to talk about our common problems, our common solutions, and I think this will be the impetus to more institutionalize these convenings and the work of creating common agendas, addressing and organizing around common themes with our policymakers so that they can benefit HBCUs, the 10 HBCUs in North Carolina.
Great, thank you for that. And yes, those caucus conversations are afoot with Representative Hawkins. So thanks for the reminder that that work is coming back to a neighborhood near NC10. Dr. Coleman, another part of the NC10 work of the listening tour one of the main conclusions was this work that HBCUs have a keen ability to provide affirming experience so many Black students and students of color are looking for. You referenced that in some of your opening commentary. How do you specifically foster this affirming experience on your campus in a way that supports student persistence and completion?
Okay. So thank you for that. So I can say that as HBCUs, I say that we're the experts, right? So we've been doing this work for the last 150 years. You know, HBCUs have played and continue to play a pivotal role in American higher education in terms of course, awarding degrees to students who have gone on to become, you know, some of America's finest, right? Leaders, revolutionaries, and innovators. And our schools have done considerably less money than our non-HBCU counterparts. You know, we've done an excellent job serving significant portions of first generation low-income students, you know, and students that have the highest level of financial need. So, you know, I would say specifically in terms of my work at the university and in student affairs, you know, in addition to the student engagement piece, the work of student affairs, it's also one of advocacy. And it requires buy-in, you know, buy-in from leadership, buy-in from faculty, staff, and even, you know, our students who feel empowered to contribute to the creation of sustainable programs, well-supported services and resources, right, to meet even some of the most basic needs, you know, of our students. So, you know, in student affairs, we have these principles that we practice, you know, called the principles of good practice for student affairs. And particularly, I would say at HBCUs and in divisions of student affairs, we've been consistent with our core values to include a commitment to educating Black students, to excellence in scholarship, to social mobility, to activism, to racial uplift and empowerment, and to service. And so, you know, how do we do that, right? So how do we, you know, affirm a student experience and then support their, you know, completion and persistence at our institutions? You know, we engage students in active learning. We help our students develop coherent and clear values and ethical standards during their tenure at our institutions. We set and communicate high expectations, and, you know, not just in student learning, but outside the classroom as well. And you'll hear that from many HBCU grads. We use systemic inquiry, I would say, in discussions to improve student institutional performance. We use resources, the ones that we do have effectively, to achieve our institutional missions and goals. And I would say we're very savvy in terms of forging educational partnerships across departments, divisions, as well as in the community that help advance student learning outcomes for our students. And, you know, I would say finally, you know, we build supportive and inclusive communities on our campus. Student affairs in particular, we provide a safe and nurturing space for a diverse range of students. So people don't often talk about diversity when it comes to HBCUs, but when our students come to orientation, you know, I explained to them, I said, you're going to experience diversity on a different level, you know, on this campus, not just racial diversity. You're going to experience faculty, staff, students, you know, from different geographic areas, different religious backgrounds, you know, everything and anything you could think of. And I'm proud to say that at North Carolina Central, you know, we were the first HBCU in the state in 2013 to open an LGBTQ center on our campus. And so that just really speaks to the volume of how we really try to offer a sense of home, you know, for our students. And, you know, I would then shift probably to say that when we talk about promoting student persistence and completion, I would be remiss if I didn't discuss the importance of intentional and meaningful collaboration between student affairs, professionals, and the Division of Student Affairs and academic affairs. So strategic partnerships between those two divisions, between academic affairs and student affairs, you know, they're critical to student learning and the ultimate success and completion at the institution. Student academic success and personal development depend not only on the quality of the curriculum and the classroom instruction, but also on our work in student affairs. And so, I always talk about the P3, right? Not the public-private partnership, but purposeful, powerful partnerships between academic affairs and student affairs, where we really develop some seamless connections between experiences in and out of the classroom, co-curricular experiences that enhance the curriculum. We talk about the holistic development, right? The support and development of the entire student, increase resources and support for our students that will then equate to academic and personal success. And that ultimately that's going to lead to increased satisfaction. So we'll end up graduating happy students who become happy alums. So, I think that new partnerships can lead to greater engagement, and even for staff, renewed professional development opportunities, especially during challenging times right now, given the impact of COVID-19, where institutions are going to have to continue to navigate through some serious financial constraints, right? So we have HERF, but that's going to end eventually. And so we have some institutions that are closing or drastically reducing services and expenditures. And you have divisions and departments, admissions, enrollment services, academic affairs, that are fighting for limited resources, including dwindling dollars and student attention. So it's basically our responsibility to find ways to engage, with each other as NC10, as HBCUs, and within our institutions to engage and support students who are navigating, we know, a lot of challenges, right? So mental health, remote education, rising tuition costs. And in the past, I would say that college campuses, the amenities was a big focus, right? On the physical structures, the symbolic, structures of engagement, like, luxurious fitness centers and our student unions and athletic stadiums and climbing walls that drew students to campus. But I think what we're going to see in the future is that new amenities are going to focus more on the impact of learning. And mainly students are going to be looking for innovative programs and initiatives that engage and capture the students' attention throughout different, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and multimodal learning contexts, right? So not just, in person or virtual, really being creative in terms of the context. So when we think about a holistic approach to student development and its impact on promoting student persistence and completion, there's endless possibilities in what student affairs professionals can do in the work, particularly with academic affairs, to work together to support students in curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular spaces that all align with institutional goals. So there's some exciting work still to be done there.
Thank you for that. This is a friendly reminder that please, for our audience, please feel free to submit questions via our Q&A function. Evan, given EdNC's role, you know how important it is to provide opportunities for HBCUs to uplift the stories of success and triumphs at HBCUs. But for our audience members today, how can we do a better job of uplifting these stories of the NC10 and of the successes of individual HBCUs just in general?
I'd like to invite everybody to think about your proximity to information about all 10 HBCUs. And I want you to start with your phone and go home and take a look, like a detached look at your feeds, right? Whatever your social media is, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, or whatever else, scroll through it. Scroll through your kids, scroll through your colleagues. I sit down with people all across North Carolina and say, can I see your phone? And I look and see what's showing up in their feeds, right? Because a lot of that information, they're self-selecting. But news outlets can also push information into those feeds. And I want you to think about, are you seeing information about all 10 HBCUs in North Carolina showing up in your feeds? And what kinds of information is showing up in your feeds? Is it just the news in real time articles like the bomb threats or leadership transition or a grant? Are you seeing the drumbeat of what's happening on these institutions? If you could start showing some of the images for me. I'd like y'all to just take a look at these images. Wynn's gonna scroll through them. They're taken by Cornell Watson, who I think is one of the best photographers in the country right now. And I want you to see that these images, visuals like high-end photography and short documentaries, short direct videos we can upload to social. They let us breathe these places in. They let us feel like we understand what the landscape is like and who the leaders are like and what it's like to be a student, not just in the classroom, but doing research, and what the spirit of the place is like. If you could be on President Armbruster's campus and you were standing and you were looking at that building that's behind him on his screen and you turned around, you would also see a brand new gleaming state-of-the-art building that sits as in the foreground to the city of Charlotte. And it is a breathtaking moment to stand on his campus and connect the old and the new and the possibility of what is happening, not just on his campus, but on all 10 of these HBCUs. So I'm a lawyer by training, and so I like to argue. But I would make the argument that dedicated coverage is important for at least these reasons. It creates awareness of all 10 HBCUs in North Carolina. It busts stereotypes. It builds public will. It informs philanthropy and policymaking. And it builds advocates and finds champions. There are other things that dedicated coverage could do too. But in the meantime, while we're having this conversation about dedicated coverage, I invite all of you to take out your phones, visit your HBCUs, and let's create this drumbeat of content around them together.
Oh, that was great. Thank you, Mevin. A really good way to end. These video pictures are phenomenal. We have actually a question coming in from the audience, specifically around our NC10. What advice would you have for other states that are interested in organizing a learning community similar to what we've accomplished here and with the NC10? What are the essentials that are needed to start the conversation for those states? If you're okay, I'll start with the President Armbruster, and then we'll come to Dr. Coleman, and Mevin will wrap up any thoughts you may have, Mr. President.
What a great question. You know, so often you're kind of head down, just doing your job every day. But every once in a while, you get a call. And again, I think someone paid tribute to Mr. Ford, James Ford, who made the inquiry and made the call. And when he made the call, it made so much sense. He said, "Look," and he was very, very upfront. He said, "Look, I may not know a lot about it, but your story is not getting out." And then your comments in the last segment were just spot on. I too am a lawyer, so I really appreciated your argument. But it's just really having someone who has the interest and the institutions answering the call. So whomever, if it's Chanel, Ms. Watson, who asked the question, reach out to your HBCUs. Believe me, many of them, particularly in light of what's gone on over the last 18, 20 months, have been working together nationally, but maybe not in the local and state realm. But I would think you should be able to make that call, and I believe you will have the call answered, as I'm so proud the other 9 members, presidents of the NC10 here answered the call from Mr. Freed.
Dr. Coleman, Mevin, either one? Yes, please.
I was going to say, you know, it's important also to see when we're trying to develop like these learning communities consortiums, that many of our national organizations, you know, have laid some of that groundwork, right? So APLU, you know, I know, you know, in my previous institution at Florida A&M, we were involved with HBCU Innovation and Entrepreneurship Collaborative. And, you know, you have Thurgood Marshall College Fund, you have UNCF. And so, you know, I think that there's a lot of opportunities for cohorts, you know, of HBCUs to begin having those discussions. But again, it really begins on the ground, right? So grassroots sometimes, you know, myself with, you know, my cohort member who is Dr. Haywood over at, you know, John C. Smith's that serves as a VP for Student Affairs. So her and I, you know, talk about different things. But I would say, you know, really look at what's already out there in terms of our national organizations and what type of work they're doing, and then try to, you know, maybe piggyback on some of those efforts so that we're not, I always say, you know, there's no need to reinvent the wheel, right? A lot of the good work and relationships have already started in those conversations. And sometimes you just need more people to kind of push those along.
I would just recall a moment walking into the first NC10 convening at President Armbruster's campus and running first into Minnie Fort Brown, who is a strategic advisor to the NC10 initiative and who I've known for some time. And she looked at me and she said, "This is the first time we've been convened to do business." And it just like, you know, I got chill bumps and like we both kind of, our eyes teared up. And like, so when I think about leadership, the first lesson of leadership to me is just start. So I would just say, like, this is the moment where we all jump into this, whether it's in North Carolina or in other states, and we just create the opportunity to bring people together and let it unfold. See what people are actually interested in working together on.
Great, thank you. I got a question here from a director of counseling, Ms. Lugavina from New York, trying to figure out, she did an informational session on HBCUs. She made overtures and got 3 representatives from, I think 20 overtures were made. What are ways you all are seeing to enhance engagement with your local high schools, regional high schools, and certainly high schools across the state and beyond across the country? How are those relationships cultivated from the university's perspective, and how do we strengthen them from the district perspective? I'm going to start that one with Dr. Coleman. Seems a little bit maybe up her wheelhouse, and then I'll allow the other 2 to chime in. Dr. Coleman.
So I'll say that, right, COVID has been in an odd way a blessing, because it has allowed us in this virtual space, and not just North Carolina Central, but many HBCUs and MSIs to participate in these virtual college fairs and just virtual experiences. And I say even in our programming on our campus, we've been able to reach a population of students that we've never been able to necessarily reach before, either, you know, location or geographically, it's a challenge. And even my son, he's a junior in high school, and I'm always constantly signing him up for these type of, you know, virtual college fairs. So I think that's been a great opportunity for us as HBCUs. I know that at North Carolina Central, we've enhanced our brand on a national level. You know, people know who we are, you know, in Durham and North Carolina, but we have really gotten some national recognition where I've seen even the increases in our out-of-state applications have gone up, you know, quite significantly. To that counselor, I would say, just reach out, right? I'm from New York. My brother lives in Central Islip. So sometimes you just really need to go on LinkedIn or find who those people are to make those connections and to really kind of build, again, from the grassroots. Sometimes that's what it takes, that relationship, and to expand that participation. But I think, again, in the virtual space has really provided a lot of benefits and opportunities for many HBCUs to get in front of a different type of student that maybe we haven't reached in the past.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I couldn't agree more. I would gather that COVID has been a blessing in that sense, that in light of the use of virtual opportunities, it's really, really expanded our opportunity. We were looking at statistics the other day. Our applications are way, way up in large part because of the virtual platform. But we'd love to get you on campus, because we think that once you get here, you're gonna sign up. So maybe the first connection is virtually. Reach out. Our staffs are real interested in talking to you. And I hope we were not one of the 17 that didn't respond. I'll find out. If you reached out to John C. Smith, you can DM me and let me know if we didn't respond. But the virtual space, as Dr. Coleman said, has made it very, very much easier for us to really reach a much broader opportunity. So just reach out, and I'm sure we'll respond. I think we lost your volume.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, sir. Both of you mentioned the pandemic. So how has the role of HBCUs changed during the pandemic? Mr. President, we'll start with you and Dr. Coleman.
Well, as Dr. Coleman said, she's turned into the mama bear. I think many of us have really had to be parents and those guardians in the absence. It's created a lot of stress. You know, I was talking even to one of our coaches the other day, who just talked about the stress levels on the students, athletes that we have. COVID has been a game changer. We were closed for the entire academic year. So Our students went away in March when our county declared an emergency and told everybody who was in congregate settings that they had to leave. And we didn't bring students back until August of 2021. So as you can imagine, that and then trying to deliver instruction, virtually was a challenge, but we just thought for our community, that was the choice that we made. And it's had some lasting effects, in terms of trying to get the students back, trying to get them engaged, notwithstanding the great efforts of Dr. Haywood, Dr. Coleman. She's working really hard to try to get that student engagement back up. But it has been a little bit of a pall in many of the students. I think some of them are still distracted by it. The bomb threats that we talked about earlier don't help that situation. So there's just a lot of noise out there. And when we can get past this, I think many of us are going to have to learn to live with it. And that's what we're trying to tell of our campuses, that at some point we're going to have to learn how to adapt and live with it, which is what we're doing pretty well here. But ultimately, it has had some effect on the psyche of our students. And when I think about the students that we have, particularly our sophomores who joined us in August of this year, think about it. They graduated from high school. Their high school graduation was interrupted. And for those who matriculated Johnson C. Smith, they couldn't come onto the campus their freshman year. So the first time that they got here was their sophomore year. So that has a lasting effect. We're seeing a lot more calls on, counseling, mental health services and things like that. So those are areas that we have already beefed up and making sure that we keep a pulse on our students. Financially, it has been a challenge. We've had to spend a lot more money in areas that we didn't have to spend, whether it's PPE, and I appreciate all the help of the federal government. But again, as Dr. Coleman mentioned out, that HERF money is going to run out, and you're going to have to make sure, if we continue to live with COVID, how we're going to provide for the additional resources that are required to do it. So it has been a challenge, and we're hopeful that we continue to adapt to that challenge.
So I would say that for HBCUs, the pandemic, it pushed it pushed many administrators, right, for us to think more strategically about our institutions and really in the wake of all these daunting challenges, right, to face. I mean, you had health and safety, we're dealing with financial, how are we going to keep the students safe? And for many of us at many HBCUs, despite having shut down temporarily in March 2020, we didn't have much of a choice but to allow students in particular to return on campus, right? So, and closing the campus for even one semester, would have severely hindered our ability, honestly, to reopen, the following year. So, in a way, again, there's been positives. It has, made us really look at our infrastructure, and, our technology. I would say from my perspective, we do tout that we know our students, right? And that, we are like family with our students. But what I did learn is that we didn't know as much as we thought we knew. So we didn't know the number of students that were really accessing Blackboard from their phones. We did make some assumptions. Every student has a laptop, every student has Wi-Fi. So I think what it has caused us to do now is really the assessment, right? Look at the data. And, we've done different types of surveys to assess our students and their needs and then react to those appropriately. I could say now that, students really have been back in full swing since last fall. I told my team, we don't know what the long-term impact is going to be of this pandemic on our students, and it may not manifest itself right away. So we've been doing some surveys. We're actually rolling out a survey through ACHA to look at our students' mental health and wellness, because we see that the severity of some of the issues that students are presenting with are quite, serious. President Amberster noted the engagement piece. That's been a challenge. Students are glad to be on campus, but the reality is that they have a lot of anxiety, and they're still, scared. Many of them were 16 or 15 when the pandemic, started. So, we have seen some challenges just in terms of general anxiety, anger, students, in terms of how they interact with each other. So there's a lot for us to really unpack, on our campuses, and a lot of work to be done. And then, some questions that we've been asking ourselves, right? If there's ever going to be a post-pandemic era, right? There will be eventually, but, how will we continue to evolve and adapt to like serious financial burdens that are likely going to linger, right? Or maybe worsen, when some institutions, are fragile financially. We're doing, very well at North Carolina Central, but that's not the case for every HBCU. And despite, again, national, recognition and that we've been in the news, many of our institutions were still impacted in terms of enrollment, and the pandemic, just really exacerbated, some of that. So there's still a lot, that we have to work on, and, just seeing the long-term impact, particularly on our students and how it will change maybe the culture, of our campuses as we work through the pandemic.
I would just note, like, part of the importance of news coverage is it documents all that and archives it in a way that policymakers and philanthropists can analyze it and synthesize it across all the institutions. So we were able to visit, we didn't stop traveling during COVID. We visited 45 school districts between March 20 and March 2021, and we visited 29 community colleges in person. And we were able to document what was happening, both the challenges and the opportunities, but the lessons learned in a way that other people can refer back to it. Javad's, the Hunt Institute, is leading an effort now, the COVID constituency, to look at what about the pandemic will shape the future of education. And part of the importance of dedicated coverage is so that your experiences get to be part of that mix that informs public policy moving forward.
So I have one last question. Just thinking about this renewed attention on HBCUs recent months, maybe past year. What do you see as the future for HBCUs moving forward? Mr. President, I'll start with you, and we'll kind of go to Dr. Coleman and give him the last word.
Okay. Well, I am encouraged, particularly as I sit here in Charlotte. HBCUs who are strategic in their approach, who can figure out their value proposition, I think have a great opportunity to be successful and thrive in this environment. There are many who are fragile, as Dr. Coleman mentioned, but if they can kind of figure out their value proposition, because there are many students who, for all of the reasons that Dr. Coleman talked about, that we share as well, being a family atmosphere, putting your hands and arms around these students are qualities that HBCUs are known for. And quite frankly, it's been more apparent and necessary in light of the last 20 months. So we are starting to get more attention. In addition to which, the philanthropic community has turned its eye towards HBCUs. I know we were fortunate here because of our esteemed mayor, Vi Lyles, who made it a point in the wake of the George Floyd killing to really challenge the business community to come forward and figure out how they were going to help this community of Charlotte reach upward economic mobility. And among the 4 areas that she mentioned, she said, we have an HBCU here, it's a Johnson C. Smith, and we don't want it to survive, we want it to thrive. And as a result of that, on November 1st, here on our campus, we convened the first time. And then you talked about how we had that meeting here with the 10 presidents. We had a meeting of the minds of the largest corporate, philanthropic, and civic businesses on our campus on November 1st, who pledged, among other things, over $72 million to support Johnson C. Smith in its efforts to thrive. And they did that in large part because we have a strategic plan, what we refer to as the golden blueprint I mentioned earlier, in which they believe, which will help not only Johnson C. Smith, but help the region. So what I would say to HBCUs is that they will clearly have the opportunity to thrive. There are students out there who want the brand of educational opportunities that we provide. They want the high touch feel of an HBCU campus. They want the experiences that were reflected in the photographs that you mentioned. And quite frankly, they want the education that is clearly second to none that HBCUs can provide. So I feel very, very confident that HBCUs who have articulated a value proposition will find sufficient enrollment to make sure those value propositions are fulfilled.
So I would say that the future is HBCU. I think we're the future. Again, I reiterate, we've been doing, this work despite smaller endowments, less funding than our non-HBCU counterparts, that we work our magic, and we are performing far better than I think many have expected us to perform, and we continue to play an imperative role, in educating Black Americans. So, we're graduating a high percent of Black Americans with bachelor's degrees. We're graduating a quarter of, STEM degrees, and not to mention, social mobility, right? So when we talk about HBCUs, we've been instrumental in creating the American Black middle class and helping students, climb and change their SES, right in front of our eyes, and climbing the economic ladder. So, I would say that, again, we are, the future. We know that there's benefits to education. At HBCUs, our graduates have more positive memories, of their college experience. They're more likely to thrive financially, physically, socially, in terms of well-being. I'm talking my student development talk, after graduating, when compared to non-HBCU counterparts. I mean, that's research, and that's what really is out there. So, again, I would just say that we are the future.
It's my privilege to be in schools all across North Carolina, and our best students want to go to HBCUs. And the story of HBCUs has always been one of excellence, and it will continue to be one of excellence. And that story will only become more important with the changes in demographics coming our way. So I think it's time for us to expand the audience for those stories, and to also increase the frequency that those stories are getting out to a much wider audience.
Well, thank you to all three of you for your time this afternoon, for sharing your wisdom and your reflections with our audience that was from all over. I saw some shout outs from Jackson State and Livingston. So it's been a great conversation, hopefully the beginning of many more to come. We look forward to future convenings of the NC10 in the ways of the Institute and EdNC and CREED. myFuture will be able to support this work moving forward. Before we close, I do want to remind everyone that the Institute has several great webinars coming up. We have our homeroom, standards-based reform. What is it? What have we learned, and what comes next? It's February 8th at 2 p.m. Race and Education, Building Community Through Black Culture Centers. It's Tuesday, February 15th. 2 p.m. Early Efforts, Creating Parent Nation, Tuesday, March 1st, 2 p.m. And our Post-Secondary Pathways, which is coming up on March 10th at 2 p.m. Image, likeness, and how the NCAA's rule change affects higher education. It's been our pleasure to be with all of you today. Our team looks forward to engaging with you again soon. So thanks for joining us, and stay safe. Take care.